From August 22 to 24, a three-day summit convened, bringing together the leaders of 5 nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, collectively known as BRICS. These nations boast formidable economies, massive populations, and ambitious agendas. Remarkably, the combined gross domestic product, GDP of these 5 BRICS nations now surpasses that of the G7 when considering purchasing power parity. In nominal terms, they contribute to 26% of the global GDP. However, despite this economic might, they hold only 15% of the voting power within the International Monetary Fund, commonly referred to as the IMF. This stark imbalance has sparked concerns among the BRICS countries. Additionally, many countries in the global south are worried that the United States might use the dollar as a tool to impose sanctions, just like it did with Russia. Because of this concern, BRICS nations are working on plans to use their own currencies more and rely less on the US dollar for trade with each other. And in this video, we are going to talk about the rise of the BRICS nations and how this powerful bloc is going to counter the United States and the G7, including de-dollarization, a movement to dethrone the dominance of the US dollars. The rise of the global south. Indian Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, in his opening address at the BRICS Foreign Ministers meeting in South Africa, characterized the prevailing concentration of economic power as one that unfairly subjugates many nations to the control of a few. Most of the world's people, about 85%, live in the global south. However, when it comes to making important global decisions, these countries are often left out. Instead, a small group of Western countries still holds most of the power in political and financial institutions. Many countries in the developing world share this feeling. They think the way the United Nations Security Council is set up is old-fashioned. Only 5 nations have special powers to veto decisions, and this arrangement was made back in 1945. People believe it's time for a change. In recent times, there have been significant changes in the way the world is run. China, a major player in the global economy and military, is challenging the power of the United States. Iran's foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdollahian, met with Saudi Arabia's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, with the help of China, marking a historic step towards improving relations between these long-standing Middle Eastern rivals. Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the subsequent strengthening of ties between Moscow and Beijing, despite criticism from the West, have sped up this shift. Meanwhile, India, Brazil, and South Africa are treading carefully, not joining Western sanctions or actions against Russia but also distancing themselves from Moscow's reasons for the war. The way the Western countries have reacted to Russia's war in Ukraine is worth noting. They have imposed strong sanctions that have almost completely cut off Russia from the global financial system. This has made emerging economies concerned that the United States might use this same kind of power against them in the future. India is also taking action on the global stage. They are actively advocating for the African Union to be represented at the G20 summit. India is going to host the G20 summit soon, and they believe it's important to include African nations in these global discussions. As Western influence diminishes in various parts of the world, including the recent events in Niger and the Sahel, more and more voices from Africa, Latin America, and emerging Asian powers like India are calling for a change from the post-Cold War system where the United States held most of the power. Russia and China are positioning themselves as leaders in this shift away from a world dominated by the United States, which, according to the Global South, often disregards its own rules. The expansion of BRICS. The recent BRICS summit was the biggest one ever, with over 60 countries attending along with the 5 member nations. Starting in January 2024, the BRICS group will officially include Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. In fact, more than 40 other countries are interested in joining BRICS, according to South Africa, who chaired the 2023 summit. This expansion, the first since South Africa joined in 2010, will more than double the group's size and increase its global influence, especially in the Middle East. For China and Russia, this expansion is part of their effort to turn this economic alliance into a political counterbalance to Western powers like the G7. The new members see it as a way to diversify their business opportunities, reducing their reliance on Western countries and their regulations. They're attracted by the promise of special trade deals among BRICS members and other incentives to boost trade and investments across borders. The current BRICS members represent about 42% of the world's population and over $27 trillion in total economic output. With the new members, BRICS will include 46.5% of the world's population and approximately $30.8 trillion of the world's $100 trillion GDP. This expanded group is significant because its members are responsible for 45% of the world's oil production and have substantial industries in iron ore, coal, bauxite, and agriculture. Developed nations, like those in the G7, rely heavily on trade and cooperation with these countries, especially on issues like climate change and the environment. So, they can't afford to ignore the needs of this emerging bloc of powerful economies. BRICS play a significant role in the oil and gas industry. The expanded BRICS group, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, would consist of three of the world's biggest oil exporters, making up 42% of the world's oil supply. Right now, OPEC and other oil-producing countries control the oil market, but in the future, the larger BRICS group could have a significant impact on energy markets. For a while, OPEC Plus nations have been unhappy with Western sanctions on countries like Iran and Venezuela, which limit investment and oil exports. More recently, the EU's restrictions on Russian oil and petroleum products, along with price controls set by the EU and G7, have created a new way to impose sanctions by targeting revenue instead of the amount of oil being sold. Other oil-exporting countries worry that they might face similar sanctions in the future and are cautious about G7 actions that could reshape the global energy trade. An expanded BRICS would include both oil and natural gas exporters and two of the world's largest importers, China and India. Interestingly, both China and India have refused to join the price cap coalition that targets Russia. This means that producers and consumers in the BRICS group share an interest in finding ways to trade commodities without relying on the G7's financial sector. Crude oil is the most traded commodity in the world. And for years, the Middle Eastern countries have agreed to trade crude oil with US dollars, and this is known as the petrodollar. Petrodollars are the primary source of revenue for many OPEC members and other oil exporters. Oil exporters settle sales in US dollars because the dollar is the most widely used currency, making it easier for them to invest export proceeds. Now, with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran, three of the planet's leading oil exporters, joining BRICS, the process of de-dollarization could accelerate even further. Just imagine if all BRICS nations opted to trade crude oil utilizing their respective local currencies or alternative global currencies instead of the US dollar. This shift would undoubtedly diminish the dominance currently enjoyed by the dollar. If the petrodollar system were to falter, it could lead to increased volatility in the value of the US dollar. The stability and demand for the dollar have been supported by its role as the world's primary reserve currency, and any significant shift away from this role could lead to uncertainty and fluctuations in its value. If the petrodollar system were to erode significantly, it might encourage a shift toward a more diversified international monetary system. Other currencies, such as the euro, Chinese yuan, or even a new digital currency, could gain prominence in international trade and finance. This could lead to a gradual realignment of global currency reserves away from the dollar. BRICS may control the energy sector. The expanded BRICS group is likely to adopt a strategy similar to the Minerals Security Partnership, MSP, led by the United States, which aims to enhance energy security for itself and 13 of its partner countries. The inclusion of Argentina will bolster the bloc's supply of lithium. Argentina possesses the world's third-largest lithium reserves. The country's share of the global lithium supply is expected to increase from 6% in 2021 to 16% by 2030, surpassing Chile and becoming the world's second-largest lithium producer by 2027. Currently, Argentina has 13 lithium projects in development, more than any other country. With the addition of Argentina, BRICS will have 3 of the world's top 5 lithium producers, including China and Brazil. Like the MSP, BRICS will also aim to attract both public and private investments in critical mineral supply chains among its member nations. Saudi Arabia, another new member, has already been making substantial investments in lithium and other critical minerals in Brazil. It recently entered into a $2.6 billion agreement to acquire a 10% stake in Brazil's largest mining company, Vale's Base Metals division, to gain access to various critical minerals, including nickel and copper. This partnership is essential for Saudi Arabia to achieve its goal of producing 500,000 electric vehicles annually by 2030 through targeted investments. Can BRICS create a new world order? BRICS nations are expected to see an increase in their influence, but it's more probable that the bloc will provide incremental economic and diplomatic alternatives to the prevailing US-led global order rather than undertaking a dramatic replacement. This could potentially result in heightened tensions with Western powers, as leaders within the BRICS group strive to establish an independent course in an ever-changing world. Nevertheless, for the BRICS to remain effective, they must grapple with the diverse priorities of their member nations, which will be a formidable challenge that won't be easily resolved. Do you think BRICS is able to dethrone G7 and the dominance of dollars? Leave your comments below and tell us what you think. If you like what you watch, hit the like button to show your support. More importantly, subscribe to this channel so that you will continue to receive interesting videos about the happenings in Asia.